Okay, thank you very much, Gillian, and thanks to everyone for coming along today. I'm going to speak for probably around 25 minutes just on some of the key findings that I've drawn out of the 2015 Life and Times survey. But before I begin, I would like to extend a note of thanks to Paula Devine, to Lizanne and Professor Gillian Robinson, and also to Miss Shona Higginbotham, who's somewhere, yes? Somewhere? No, it's still outside. Because they have provided enormous support going through this project, but not only supporting me as a researcher engaging with Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, but I also want to be very conscious that while this is the first research update I've been involved in, this is a resource that I use in my teaching. This is a resource that I use in my research articles, in any books that I write, any presentations that I give. The first data set that I go to, whether it's about conflict anywhere in the world or about Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey is the go-to database. It is a phenomenal resource. It's in its origins, it was very forward-thinking. It was very much cutting edge, and it's something that hasn't been replicated across a range of different conflict zones. So Northern Ireland stands apart in terms of other societies moving out of conflict, in terms of the databases that it has. And I think that's something to be very mindful of and to be conscious of the work of the ARC team at this moment in time as well. But before I begin, the two things that I'm conscious of is that in this Life and Times survey is that, maybe just click through. The two key things that really sprung out at me whenever I was thinking about community relations is the continued ideas around perceptions of the other and perceptions of of people themselves within community life, but also in terms of how people engage with space, how they share space, how they view what is traditionally thought of as very segregated and contested space in Northern Ireland. But this also speaks very firmly to the programme of government, and it highlights these two aspects of what I'm going to talk about today, highlight key government policies in relation to shared and contested space. So I will speak a little bit about the programme for government in that regard. And I do think this is particularly timely. So we do have the programme for government, but we're also approaching the 10th anniversary of the restoration of devolution in Northern Ireland. So it is pertinent to think and explore how attitudes have changed or have not changed with regard to cross-cultural relations, as well as examine how this has impacted upon how people live their lives, what shops they go to, what services they access. Because Northern Ireland has tended to be a very fragmented, segregated and contested society. And I've written about this in the past. So these are the two areas I primarily want to focus on. What I will say in terms of context is that we can see that 52% of people in 2015 now feel that relations are better than they were 5 years ago. And this is a marked increase from the 2014 results, which I think you have copies of Duncan Morrow's report, research update, because that was quite an alarming decrease, with 45% of people feeling that relations were better. So this is a sign that the context is improving in terms of cross-cultural relations. 2007, so the year that devolution was restored, this was actually the key moment where cross-community relations, or attitudes towards cross-community relations, were at their best. 65% of people thought at that time in 2007 that relations had improved, and that remains the highest figure in 2007 since the survey began. However, in the intervening years, activities and events have created their own ups and downs for cross-community relations and for attitudes on how communities view each other. Since 2007, we can see that these important events and developments regarding intercommunal relations, whether that be around the symbols of flags, culture, identity, parades, all of those key events have shaped attitudes and have had an impact. This year we do have the Commission for Flags, Identity, Culture and Tradition. So this research update does speak, in fact, to some of the ongoing work that they're facing, particularly in regard to communities and the challenges they face around space, symbols, the painting of curbstones, and other forms of cultural expressions. So Duncan Morrow's research update in 2014 did highlight that the fallout from the very contentious period of 2012-2013, where intercommunal relations actually bottomed out, this 52% shows that there has been a recovery. And this actually helps us to rethink what Paul Nolan in his peace monitoring report in 2014 talked about. The moral base of the 1998 Good Friday Belfast Agreement had evaporated. Likewise, my colleague at Ulster University in 2014 talked about the structures of intercommunal relations in Northern Ireland and the institutionalisation of it, talk about how people feel they are prisoners of the past. So there's this sense of pessimism in 2014 has certainly been, has moved forward a little bit in this piece update, in this research update. So the key things that I am keen to find today is, have things changed from 2014? What can we tell about cross-community attitudes and attitudes towards space? But bearing in mind that this survey was captured in and ahead of the 2016 commemorations and celebrations that were a pivotal focus for many of the people who were involved in this room. I should say as well that only 4% of people think relations are worse, and that's an important indicator as well to be aware of. So even though we have 52%, I think we do have a note of caution for those of us who are involved in building and working towards and researching cross-community relations. 52% maybe isn't quite where we want to be 10 years after the restoration of devolution. In terms of perceptions then, there are a number of very sobering realities in this research update. There is little brightness. We do have this idea within this percentage of believing that relationships will be better between Protestants and Catholics in 5 years' time. We can see that there is some brightness, but it is mitigated by a number of other data that I will present. There is some variation between groups on this. So figure 1 shows that over the past 3 years that there has been a rise in optimism among Protestant respondents, but there is a continued downward trend within Catholic responses. We can also see that within Northern Ireland there is highly segregated residential, social and leisure areas. Northern Ireland is both a place of belonging and othering. It is a place of us and them. That's not new to any of us, but what we do see in Northern Ireland, and this is very, it's almost unique in terms of across Europe, Northern Ireland does have a strong sense of social cohesion within its communities. So 87% of respondents to the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey in 2015 felt a strong sense of belonging to their community, to their neighbourhood. And this is really quite impressive, because if we look across Europe and we look even across other conflict societies, such a high level of sense of belonging is at odds with what we would see elsewhere. And I guess this is quite striking. So approximately 9 out of 10 respondents felt this connection to their neighbourhood. And again, this is something we can maybe pick up in the discussion. There is a marked difference here that is worth pointing out, which is 70% of no religion. So 70% of those with no religion say that they belong to their, so slightly reduced. In a society that is fragmented through conflict, this social sense of belonging is worthy of further investigation. Identity and relational places in Northern Ireland do help bond people to a neighbourhood or bond people to a community. But this very strong sense of belonging does raise some concerns for me as a researcher about the porousness of these communities, of these neighbourhoods, and of the other identities that actually may want to move in or occupy those spaces. So in terms of the actual belonging of neighbourhoods, we do have to question whether or not there is any to and fro within those communities. The Northern Ireland Life and Time Survey not only tells us about belonging on a very local level, but it also tells us about people's attitudes towards belonging at a national identity level. And most respondents, 83% of respondents, said that they felt a sense of belonging to Northern Ireland. This sense of belonging was similar for Protestants and Catholics. And again, you can see that even within this chart, you can see that there is a strong sense of Northern Irishness across the board. Those with no religion were least likely to feel a sense of belonging to Northern Irishness, with around 70%. But again, there's high levels of a sense of belonging to Northern Irishness. And again, this sits with what we've seen in the 2011 census, this growing trend towards a Northern Ireland identity. And again, this is something that merits a lot of further attention. What we can see is that there is a sense of belonging to Northern Ireland across all of the different identities. This is especially strong among people who relate to being British as well, unsurprisingly. But what we can see from both of these questions is that there is a strong sense of contentment with community life, as well as an increasing identification with Northern Irish identity. I am keen to move on to think about space. I started off my first year in university as a geographer, and I've never quite left that behind. So I have a really strong element in my work in conflict and peace studies around space. So I was very keen to do this in the research update. But I want to highlight and remind us of the TBUC strategy, which does talk about this idea of our shared community. And I would argue very firmly that in a society moving out of political violence and out of conflict, is that space matters. Space matters in the way that we live our lives, it matters in the way that we engage with the other, it matters in the way that we move through contestation. The TBUC strategy likewise focuses on space as an issue, and it has the following stated aims: to create a community where division does not restrict the life opportunities of individuals, where all areas are open and accessible to everyone, and to create a community where division does not but these are the key issues, okay? So it is about openness, it's about not restricting, and it's about being accessible. We can see, and I was chatting with people before we came in, that we can see that there have been significant efforts already to bring this about. Advancement in creating shared spaces in Northern Ireland, such as the initiative at Girdwood in North Belfast, as well as shared neighbourhood developments on the Ravenhill Road, for example, and beyond Belfast. We have Brook Park in Derry City, we have developments in Saintfield in County Down, and we also have the Abrington shared space in Derry City. So this is not just something that's happening in Belfast. Within this policy context and within this spatial context, the Northern Ireland Life Survey does teach us a lot about attitudes that people have towards shared space. Their attitudes, but also their behaviour around shared spaces. In terms of sharing space, as a social scientist, I'm very interested in how people belong to space, how they use space, but also how space has been changed through architecture, through planning, through very social processes during conflict and after conflict, or after agreement, should I say more accurately. What we do see in Northern Ireland is that Northern Ireland does remain very much highly segregated in terms of its residential, social and leisure areas. and it is, I would argue, a place of both belonging and othering. In 2014 or 2015, we do see this strong sense of social cohesion, which I mentioned earlier. But we also see that people are again very keen to think about space in the way in which they use it. So the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey does raise questions about how they access resources, how they access services. How do people feel about using services in different areas that they traditionally wouldn't use? And this provided quite interesting results. So in terms of thinking about viewing neighbourhoods segregated, we can see in part in this table shows us that largely respondents were saying that 2/3 of respondents did not think that their local community was divided. So just over a quarter of respondents thought that the use of different facilities according to community background happened a little or a lot. So this gives us some food for thought about actually how people use space. Perhaps is not as segregated as we would traditionally think. Within this, we can also see those with no religion were least likely to say that this does not happen at all. And this was also the group that was most likely to say they don't know. However, this is again the nature of the question, so it was specifically about community background, which is another issue to think about. So we can see that on this table in particular that using different shops and services according to community background for almost 2/3 of respondents is not an issue, okay? Which again is a pertinent finding at this moment whenever we're thinking in a very policy orientated way around space. Safe spaces is another key aspect that does come out very firmly through the research update. And this question has been asked a number of times in the past, and it's about using different types of spaces. So in particular GAA clubs, orange halls, or secondary schools. Again, typically what we think of as traditionally very segregated spaces that are used by one side or another. We can see that while, and the previous slide shows that the use of local shops or services is due to convenience and it's really not contentious for 2/3 of respondents, yet this table shows that the use of different type of spaces can cause concern, especially when these premises are associated with a particular religion. So this does create a particular and speaks directly to the TBUC engagement or the TBUC strategy around having open and accessible spaces. So the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey respondents were asked to think about an event if they wanted to go to in a nearby town and consider how they would feel if it was at one of these 4 different premises: GAA Hall or GAA Club, Orange Hall, Catholic or Protestant secondary school. This table shows that secondary schools are the least contentious of the specified. Approximately 8 in 10 respondents said that they would feel very or quite safe visiting a Catholic secondary school or Protestant secondary school. So 3/4 would feel safe going there. Respondents were less sure about going to an event in a GAA club or an Orange Hall, although 2/3 again are saying that they would feel safe. So in terms of thinking around how people use rural and urban environments, how people use different resources within their communities, the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey does clarify some of this for us. What we can also see is that many different types of symbols can be used to demarcate space and to socialise territory. Since 2005, the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey has included a number of questions which focus on attitudes or feelings towards murals or curb paintings, flags. And these are three very distinct markers of community identity or affiliation in Northern Ireland. And these are some of the issues I'm just going to speak about in the next 5 to 10 minutes. And again, they're not, all of these various issues are not without their contestation within communities as well as for those outside of that particular viewpoint. Marking space. There is a very polarised response in the 2014 or 2015 Northern Ireland Life and Time survey around flying of flags. There's mixed levels of support for flying of flags and lampposts throughout Northern Ireland, particularly whenever the question's asked about special dates or particular celebrations. So 38% in the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey 2015 respondents would support that, but 40% would not support the flying of flags for special dates. So it is very polarised. Small proportion, 3%, say it depends on the flag. But there are statistically significant differences on how people of different religions, different religious backgrounds view this question. So as you can see here, the majority of Protestants support the flying of flags versus 22% of Catholics. And the reverse is true for Catholics on this question, or the reverse is true whenever you think about Catholic respondents. So 22% support the flying of flags and lampposts, for example, with 57% against the flying of flags and lampposts. So this is again an issue of polarisation, unsurprisingly. One other issue regarding this is the Catholics are very much in favour of all flags being taken down on lampposts straight away, even if this causes trouble, and there's less support within Protestant communities. Following on from the flag dispute in 2012-2013, Northern Ireland Life and Time survey has included a question on public attitudes to the flags issue. And this table shows that just over one half of respondents, so 55%, support the idea that the Union flag should be shown only on designated days from public buildings. And again, there's not significant polarisation here, so 60% of Catholics, 53% of Protestants, and 51% with no religion. However, there is a significant minority of Protestants, 40%, who feel that the Union flag should be flown from all public buildings all of the time. So 40% still remain committed to that. At the same time, support for never flying the Union flag on public buildings is highest among Catholics, 31%, and 3% among Protestants. So there is some significant margin there as well. Moving on, and this is one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in, is the issue of murals. And space and murals is something that, again, the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey have been monitoring for over a number of years, particularly attitudes regarding this. And in terms of, one of the questions is about percentage of feeling annoyed by Republican and Loyalist murals, curb painting, flags, by religion. This chart is showing some of the responses here. This shows that there has been a downturn in annoyance at Loyalist murals, curb painting and flags among both Catholics and Protestants. So for example, among Catholic respondents, the proportion of annoyed by displays has dropped from 36% in 2014 to 28% in 2015. And for Protestants, likewise, this has dropped. So the level of annoyance has dropped from 30% in 2014 to 20% in 2015. And this may mark an ebbing of tensions emerging from the dispute about the flying of the Union flag and cultural symbols in 2012 and 2013, but also it may indicate growing apathy. Or perhaps it may just be the case that there's fewer curbs being painted and fewer murals being visible, and maybe fewer flags for that case. What we can see is that there are also a similar decrease in the proportion of respondents saying that they have felt annoyed by Republican markers. For Catholics, this has dropped from 24% in 2014 to 14% in 2015, and from 31% for Protestants down to 24% in 2015. One of the key things that strikes me coming forward from thinking about this research is actually thinking, is the territorialisation of space less of an issue as we approach the 10th year of devolution and the 20th year of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement? Can we start to think that these symbols, such as the Commission is engaged in, is this something that we need to be thinking about with regard to flags, murals, curbstone paintings? Is this becoming less of an issue for communities and for individuals or not? We still do have around 1/5 of the population annoyed by these visible markers of territory. One of the other key issues that we can engage with through and speaks very much to how we use space, what space means for communities, and what also space means for traditions and histories and heritage, is the issue of parading. And 2016 has been, we're in the midst of the decade of centenaries, and it has been a particularly momentous one. And significant efforts have been made by a lot of people who are in this room to think about opening up and making some of these commemorations less divisive, more shared, and equally more accessible, so engaging people with history. There's been much work put into branding and marketing of museums, of events such as Orange Fest and Patrick's Day, and there is an emphasis much more on the carnival atmosphere. So what we can see is that 2015, 2016 has been about opening access, widening debate, encouraging engagement. And I would say quite a lot of hard work and graft has gone into those processes. But what we can see here is that parading for almost 2/3 is a legitimate form of cultural celebration. So we can see that the vast majority of respondents in 2015 are acknowledging, 64%, that this is a legitimate form of celebration. So to go through this in a little bit more detail, we can see that this is the vast majority of view of Protestants, 81%, although it's not the case. So less, 63% of no religion, and under half, 48% of Catholics agree. So there is general agreement within the Life and Time survey. 70% of respondents thought that parades should be allowed if the organisers and local residents were to agree to the arrangements. Catholic respondents were statistically more likely to agree to that statement than Protestant respondents. So 82% of Catholics were likely to agree that parading should be allowed if organisers and local residents were likely to agree to the parade. This is in contrast to 63% of Protestants. A minority of respondents agreed that parades are less confrontational these days, 29%. And the same proportion of people thought that parades are more tolerant than they used to be. Protestant respondents are much more likely to agree with both of those statements. And one thing that we can see as well, that whenever the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey asks about personal experience of parading, 1 in 5 are saying that they have felt annoyed by loyalist parades or marches during the past year. 27% of Catholics and 18% of Protestants. Annoyance at Republican parades is slightly lower, 13%, including 6% of Catholics and 20% of Protestants. So this, for me, still indicates that there is still some contention, but significantly less, in terms of space and symbols around marches. So just by way of addressing and reinforcing some of the key points that strike me whenever looking at space and community relations in 2015 Northern Ireland Life and Times survey is that there is a sense of optimism cautiously emerging, and I use the word cautious because we are in Northern Ireland after all. But 52% of people again think that community relations are better than 5 years ago, and equally, 45 or 46% continue to think that that trajectory will continue. We can also see that there is some support for flying of the Union flag on buildings on designated days only. And again, 2/3 of respondents are agreeing that parading is a legitimate form of cultural celebration. So whenever we think about the key issues and the key challenges that we face in Northern Ireland in a context of segregation, division, and problems around cross-community dialogue and cross-cultural understanding, what we can see is, to summarise, is that we can still see that there is a space between the two main communities, and this space continues to be well defined in terms of attitudes toward each other and attitudes towards the other space and attitudes towards the other symbols. And I think as we move forward into thinking about 20 years after Belfast Good Friday, 10 years after the restoration of devolution, my argument would be that peace building and cross-communal understandings actually remains a key task and a key challenge for us, given that there remain such distinctive attitudes that represent incompatibilities on a range of cultural and political issues. So thank you for your attention today on this, and I'd be